Good to be with you. Thank you for coming in tonight. Thank you for joining us. My thanks to Mike and all the team and Kay and everybody else who've looked after us so wonderfully since we've arrived here. It's good to see you. My name's Helen Shapiro, in case you thought I was a warm-up act. Well, I am, I suppose, among other things here. And I'm here to tell you how I found the Messiah. Or at least that's the beginning of it. I'm Jewish, in case you didn't get that with all the Hebrew and all that stuff. Shapiro is a very common Jewish name, actually. It's not Italian, as some people think. And I come from a little village just outside northeast London. It's kind of like, thatched roofs, pink-washed cottages, sheep gambling in the field, like they do, called Hackney. Well, I'm sure it was like that once. And I was brought up in a part of Hackney, Clapton, Stamford Hill, which was home at that time to a very large and thriving Jewish community. And I was raised in a warm and loving, sort of traditional, culturally traditional, musical Jewish home. And it was great, and I was always fine and comfortable with my Jewishness, always aware of it. I found out very early on that the Jewish people, are very had kind of, a different way of life, if you like, to the mainstream population of the country. It wasn't such a multicultural country in those days, so I guess it was more noticeable. We had different places of worship, different food, different music, stuff like that. And I used to listen to the radio a lot. Of course, in those days, it was called the wireless. What a giveaway, eh? And I used to wonder why they had programs. I mean, yeah, they had programs about on the religious things, churches and Christmas and all that sort of stuff. And I used to wonder, how come they never had anything about us, the Jewish people, and what we do? And that's when I found out that the Jewish people in this country were a tiny minority, actually. At the current figures, about 270,000, something like that, and dwindling. So, now I've always believed in God, in some fashion or form. I think it was fairly traditional early on, but it changed as I went along. And I always loved the Bible stories that they taught at the state school that I went to. Old Testament only. We Jewish kids had separate RE lessons and assemblies. And so I never heard about any Jesus or any New Testament till I was about 6 years old. And I was standing on my own in the playground one day, minding my own business, and this other little girl comes running up to me and screams, "You killed Jesus Christ!" So that was my first introduction to Jesus. Not very auspicious, you might think, but here I am tonight. I was naturally traumatized by the whole thing. I mean, I was obviously in tears. I didn't know what was going on. I'm 6 years old, and I'm being accused of murder. I'd never killed anybody. I'd never heard of this person with the funny name. And so I guess I must have gone and asked somebody what that was about. I guess they must have tried as best they could to explain it to a 6-year-old kid about anti-Semitism. But although I never forgot it, I got over it. And I got on with my little life there. And I got to the age of 14, I made a record called Don't Treat Me Like a Child, and that got in the charts. And that was the beginning of my thing into show business. And of course, anything to do with God or anything that went on the back burner straight away, right? I was so thrilled to be meeting the stars and being at the Palladium and having hit records and all that stuff that goes with show business. So that went on right up until towards the end of the 60s, when I started to think again about spiritual things. Along with the whole world. The world and his wife are out there looking for the meaning of life. Man. Yeah? Did it come here? Yeah, it's the hippie movement, of course. Everyone was out there looking for themselves and finding some pretty weird things on the way. I put my hand up. I did not lead a pristine life, but I never got involved with drugs and cults, I'm very glad to say. But I did start to take an interest in spiritual things again, like I say. Members of my family had taken to visiting mediums and clairvoyants and stuff like that in order to make contact, as they thought, with relatives who had died. Now, this fascinated me because I'd always had an interest, a curiosity about, life after death, and is there something more than this physical world, etc., etc., etc. So I started to go along to some of these people myself. And I started to read books and magazines about spiritualism and Buddhism and all kinds of psychic phenomena and all that stuff. And over the years, I kind of developed, if you like, a system of beliefs which incorporated a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a sort of a smorgasbord, you know, of isms, which these days would be called New Age. It wasn't called that then, but it's the same stuff. Now, all these beliefs seem to satisfy something in me. Some seem to answer, you know, fill a bit of a void in me. I believed it all. There were all kinds of things. And I kept a hold of these beliefs for a very, very long time. And of course, I always believed in God, as I told you. And so I associated God with all of that stuff, right? He was involved in all of that, right? And I just believed it and believed it and believed it right the way through until just after my 40th birthday, when I woke up one morning and I didn't believe it anymore. Now, I had never decided not to believe it anymore. I'd never wanted to stop. I enjoyed believing these things that I believed, but for some reason, I know it sounds weird, I couldn't. I had no control over what I believed, what I didn't believe. I wanted to believe these things, but try as I might, I couldn't. It was as if all my belief in the supernatural had disappeared overnight, like some statue had crumbled, if you like. Now, I didn't know what was happening to me. It was very weird, and if I remind you that I thought all this was from God, this stuff, so you can imagine it was pretty distressing for me. So what does that mean then? Does that mean there's nothing? And does that mean there's no God? So for the first time in my life, I was forced to consider the very existence of God himself. And I'd always taken that for granted. But here I am at 40 and a half, thinking, what's it all about? What's going on? Now, standing here today and looking back, I believe I do know what was going on. I believe God was intervening in my life in order to clear the decks of all that stuff, in order to make room for what he had for me. But of course, at that time, I didn't know any of that. Now, everything else in my life at that time was fine. My pop and jazz concerts were very successful. I was doing fine, making records. I was with the man who's now my husband. Everything was good. But just this spiritual thing, for the first time in my life, there was like an emptiness, if you like. So at the same time as this, I'll call it my crisis, all right? I had to go round to my musical director's house to pick up some music. Now, Bob, had looked after my music, played guitar for me for many years. He and his wife had become Christians, many, many years before, which was something I'd had to get my head around, because I thought they were already Christians, because they're not Jewish, so therefore they're Christians, right? If you're not Jewish, you're a Christian, right? Wrong. But they had become these Christians. They were very committed, very devout, and they didn't shove it down my throat or anything like that. But it was obviously very clear that they were very real, committed Christians. And they would occasionally talk about things that the Lord had done in their lives. You know, they called him the Lord. And these things that they talked about were obviously miracles. And I did acknowledge that. But I never for one moment considered that any of that was for me, because I'm Jewish. Jews don't believe in Jesus. That's the end of it. So that's the scenario. I'm going through my crisis. I go around to Bob's house to pick up some music. He had no idea of this stuff. Nobody knew. Well, obviously God knew. And he said this particular day, I'm thinking of giving up the music business. I said, why? I was panicking already. He said, because I believe that God wants me to be a preacher. I thought, what? He's a religious nut. He's further along than I thought, you know? I said, wait a minute, you're serious? He said, yeah. You think God wants you to be a preacher and you're just going to give it? I said, wait a minute, hold on. I said, surely music is a gift from God. He said, yeah, you're right. But sometimes, even if it's a gift from God, he might ask us to lay it aside for a while, or even for good. I said, really? I said, and you're prepared just to give it all up? To me, he was giving up his whole life. That's what that was. I mean, he was a top-flight musician, guitarist, arranger, conductor, composer, singer, the whole thing. And he was going to throw it all away for his God because of what he thought he heard. I was secretly very impressed. And I remember, I didn't let him know. I went back to my John and I said, I don't know what it is about Bob, but I envy him. I envy his faith. I did. He had no idea. I envied his faith. There's me running around like a nutter looking for the meaning of life, and all my stuff's falling apart at the same time as this. What a coincidence, come to think of it. Not. And he is so sure so calm, so assured that he's prepared to give everything up for his God. I thought, well, I want what he's got. I was provoked to jealousy. You know how scriptural that is? Romans chapter 11, verse 11, for those of you who would like to look that. He had no idea, but I started to think about this Jesus. I couldn't get him out of my mind. Everywhere I went, I was thinking about this Jesus, the object of his faith. Till finally one night I thought, okay, all right, whether I'm Jewish, whether I'm not, it doesn't matter. My stuff's falling apart. I took my courage in both hands. I'm lying on the bed and I said, Jesus? I didn't know if I was going to be struck by lightning, you know. I'm Jewish, you know. I wasn't. I said, Jesus, are you really the Messiah? Are you really the one they say, these Christians, they say you are? Surely we would have known, you know, there's all that. Why didn't we know that then? How, you know. But I said, Jesus, if you really are the Messiah, please will you show me? I really want to know. Words to that effect, and I meant it with all my heart. Now, nothing happened in the room that night, but out there somewhere something happened, that's for sure, because wherever I went in the following weeks, I was bumping into things and people connected with this Jesus. There were churches and Bibles and scriptures, and Christians were coming out the woodwork. These people, I was tripping over them. And it was all going on over a period of weeks, and culminating in the day that my band and me came back from Germany. We flew back, we'd been doing some concerts, and we were saying our farewells to each other till the next gig and all that. And Bob, who was still with me at that time, came over to me and put a book in my hand. He said, "Yeah, have a look at this." And I got hold of it, I had a look, and I was shocked. Because actually it wasn't anything that I expected it to be. I knew it would be religious, but I mean, what was on the front cover in full glossy color of this book was a picture of a menorah. What's a menorah? A menorah is a 7-branched lampstand, you know, that Jewish symbol, that which was in the tabernacle, in the temple, in many Jewish homes, etc., etc. I thought, why is he giving me a Jewish book? I looked a bit closer. The title was Betrayed, written by a man called Stan Telchin. And the bump under the title said, how would you feel as a successful 50-year-old Jewish businessman if one day your daughter told you that she believed in Jesus? I went, Jews believing in Jesus. Now, I had heard of the occasional one, and to me they were nutters, right? But this was like official and in a book. I wasn't even sure I should be reading it, you know what I mean? And then I thought, wait a minute, how did he know to give me that book? How did he know that I prayed and all this was going on? Of course, he didn't know. Nobody knew. This was my guilty secret, you know, praying to Jesus and all that. Turns out, I found out later that Bob and his wife had this book for over a year, wanted to give it to me. And every time they had tried, unbeknown to me, something had stopped them, something got in the way. This particular day, obviously nothing got in the way. I was obviously ready to receive it. I guess I'd been softened up in the preceding weeks, I don't know. Anyway, I was quite excited. I wanted to read this book. As it happens, couldn't let him know though, you know, but my heart was banging away. And I'm saying, well, yeah, you know, I'll do you a favor, read your book, sort of thing. And he's equally, yeah, you never know. Found out later his heart was banging away too. I couldn't wait to get this book home. I just couldn't wait to read this thing. I got it home and I devoured it in a couple of hours, this book. A fascinating book it was too. A wonderful story about this man, this Stan Telchin. Yes, he was successful, he was Jewish, and he was 50. This was in the 70s. And he had done very well for himself. Lovely family, perfectly respectable, pillar of the community on every committee of the synagogue, of the charities, you name it. Thank you very much. One day his daughter comes home, floors him with this information. Dad, I believe in Jesus. I believe he's the Messiah of Israel. I've given him my life. He went bananas, as you would expect. How could you do this to me, to your mother, to your family? You've betrayed us. You've betrayed your family and your people. You've betrayed the God of our fathers, and so on and so forth. But when he got over this initial shock, which was to be expected, he thought, come on. She's a kid. What does she know? I know more. I'll prove her wrong. So he set out to prove her wrong over a period of months. And he was talking to Jews and to Gentiles. And he was talking to rabbis and to pastors. And he was reading church history and Jewish history and the Old Testament and the New Testament, probably for the first time in his life. He ends up becoming a believer himself. Along with every member of his family who'd gone off to find on their own, apparently, find out on their own. Wonderful story. But the thing that kept me on this path that I was obviously on were the Messianic prophecies, which Stan Telchin quoted in his book, at the back of his book. What's a Messianic prophecy? A prophecy about the coming of the Messiah. It's as simple as that. And these prophecies, I found out, are in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. I didn't know that. I never heard of a Messianic prophecy. Now, listen, I mean, I used to love the Bible stories, like I say. I loved about Moses and Abraham and David and all this kind of stuff. I loved all that. And I knew that we, the Jewish people, had been promised this Mashiach, this Messiah, this personage who would come one day and make everything all right. I mean, I wasn't that clear on it, but I never knew there were these prophecies, such specific prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. For instance, in Isaiah the prophet, there's loads in Isaiah, you know. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, which goes, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." Now, I had always thought that was in the New Testament, because I'd only ever seen it on Christmas cards. But there it is in Isaiah. It's one of ours. I found out later they're all ours, but that's a whole other evening. And it goes on to say, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And he shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Mighty God? This really struck me. So the Messiah is supposed to be God in some way? I never knew that. I mean, I didn't know anything, but I certainly didn't know that. Wow. So I found another one, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, which says, "And the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive, and shall bring forth a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. God with us, wow. I found another one, Micah, one of the so-called minor prophets, Micah chapter 5, verse 2, which says, and this is God talking to Bethlehem. This was the first time, when I saw that was the first time I realized that Bethlehem was in the Old Testament. I never knew Bethlehem. I thought it was a place they kind of invented for Jesus or something. I don't know. But you, Bethlehem, God says, Bethlehem, though you be small among the thousands of Judah, out of you shall come one to be ruler in Israel for me. One whose goings forth are from old, from eternity. I'm thinking eternity. They're making him divine. Again, you know, mighty God. He's eternal. Is he God? I mean, this is a whole new thing for me. And I found another one, Psalm 22, which begins, "Eli, Eli, lama azavtani." My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, this is chanted in the synagogues every year around the time of the Day of Atonement, and by that time I had seen enough programs about Jesus to know that he cried out those words when he was hanging on the cross. Not remarkable necessarily if he was a Jew, all right. But if you carry on down that same psalm that begins with those words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It goes on to say, "They have pierced my hands and my feet. They have divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." And it goes on in the same vein like that all the way through the psalm. And I thought, this looks like a picture of the crucifixion of Jesus. How can that be? This psalm was written 1,000 years earlier, you know, by King David. And so how could that be possible? And anyway, there was no Roman crucifixion in David's time, and so on and so forth. And so my mind by now was getting into a bit of a whirl. Here I've got crucifixions, I've got virgins having babies, I've got Bethlehem, and it's like creating a bit of a picture, and I wasn't so sure I wanted to see this picture. And then I came face to face with Isaiah 53. Now, that whole chapter talks about this one who was to come and take upon himself our sins and our rottenness and actually our punishment. That's what it says. It says, because we all like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to his own way. And the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. That's what it says. I was amazed. It says, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace fell upon him. And with his stripes, we are healed. I was gobsmacked by now. Now, I was vaguely familiar with this. I guess I'd seen it on telly. I don't know. But it went on in the same vein, how he took the stroke that was due to us and all of this and made intercession. I'm thinking, this is all about Jesus. But again, how can this be? This is in the Old Testament. How can this be? And how come, anyway, nobody ever showed me this? How come all I got was you killed Jesus Christ? I thought, I've got to go and buy a Bible just to see, if this really is in the Bible. I've never owned a Bible in my life, so I go to buy a Bible. Where'd you go? W.H. Smith's. That's where you go to buy a Bible. What did I know? So I went into W.H. Smith's, into their religious department. Nowadays, of course, it's mind, body, spirit. But in those days, I walked in and I was confronted by row upon row upon row upon row of Bibles. Now, I thought I was going to walk in, ask for a Bible, and walk out again. Nah, there's a million of them. All different shapes and sizes and thicknesses and styles and titles and everything. There was a Good News Bible, a Jerusalem Bible, a Living Bible, a New English Bible, an Oxford Amateur Do-It-Yourself Weekly Bible. And might as well have been, for all I know. I'm thinking, how am I going to know which one to have? Why do they need so many Bibles? They can't all be right. Will the real Bible please stand up? How am I going to know? Suddenly, into my mind comes this thought. All these Bibles do have one thing in common. That word, holy. Right? I thought, I'm going to avoid that word. That's a Christian word, holy. Don't ask. And I'm going to find one that doesn't have that word. So I'm looking. It took a while, but actually I found one. It was called the Bible. It was a revised standard version. It had, which meant, of course, absolutely nothing to me, because I never knew the standard version. It had stuff at the bottom of each page to help you with the cross-referencing and all that. And it had pictures. Great, this is my Bible. I paid for it, got it home, and I opened it up to the Old Testament part. Sure enough, there's all these prophecies about the Messiah. Tons of them, ones that I've already mentioned, and many, many more. How he'd be born, where he'd be born, what he would say, what he would do, all the different things of his life, and how he would die, and how he would be buried and be raised on the third day, and all that stuff. And there was stuff about him suffering, the suffering Messiah, and there was stuff about the Messiah coming on clouds of glory as the King, which is yet to come. Soon, but yet to come. Jeremiah 31:31 and onwards talks about a new covenant where God writes his law on our hearts. Stuff in Daniel chapter 9, which talks about the Messiah being cut off before the temple was destroyed. That happened in 70 AD. So questions, but it all seemed to point to Jesus. So then I had a decision to make. You see, this Bible had that bit on the end. I'm not supposed to look in there. That chunk. Forbidden to Jews. But it was there, and I thought, well, okay, what am I going to do? I've come this far. I'm obviously on some path. No, I've got to look, but I mustn't, but I will. So I took my courage in both hands, and I opened up for the first time in my life to the New Testament. I didn't know what I was going to find. I was slightly worried about what I might find, because, well, it could have been full of all kinds of anti-Jewish poison, as far as I knew. You may wonder about that, but, when I talk about the churches, the professing church's record towards Jewish people over the last 2,000 years has not been exactly without spot or blemish. The most horrendous and unspeakable things have been perpetrated against the Jewish people in the name of Jesus, in the name of Christ and Christianity. And so we don't naturally go running towards this Jesus, right, who is obviously the cause of all of our troubles. And they get it out of their book, right? Well, imagine my surprise when I opened this book to find the most Jewish thing I'd seen outside of the Old Testament. The genealogy of Jesus. Have you read it lately? I tell you, I didn't expect to find, all these names. You see, I had read from Stan Telchin's book, which he'd found out from the Bible, that anybody professing to be the Messiah had to fulfill a few conditions. right? They had to be descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of course. They had to be of the tribe of Judah. They had to be of the house, the royal house of David, etc., etc. Many, many more. They were all these names from the Old Testament, impeccable lineage, which, like I said, I didn't expect to find in this foreign book. That's because it's not a foreign book. Did you know the New Testament was Jewish? Sorry for those of you who don't know that. It is, and I was greatly encouraged to begin reading this book. So I began to read the gospel. I found out gospel means good news, according to Matthew. But actually, Matthew is Matityahu. John is Yochanan. Mary was Miriam. Jesus is Yeshua, which means salvation. It's another coincidence. Not. James, how did he get in there? I always wondered about him. I don't know why, but I did. James is actually Jacob, Yaakov. And in every other language, Jacob retains something of his Jacobness. Only in the English does he become James. You ever wondered? Well, I did. I got a theory, though. I think King James authorized it. You want your Bible? I'm in there, right? It's a theory. You know what? It's probably true. But although we chuckle at these things, they can be serious, These things could sometimes be stumbling blocks for people from other cultures. But all right, I got over that. So I began to read the good news according to Matityahu about Yeshua, the son of Miriam. And again, my life was full of surprises, obviously, at this particular time. It wasn't set in Rome. It wasn't set in Athens. It was set in the land of Israel. It was called the land of Israel in Matthew 2, so... And these people were Jews living according to the law of Moses. There was still a temple in Jerusalem. The priesthood descended from Aaron. It was like a continuation of the Old Testament. So this was encouraging to me. So I began to read. But you know what? Even all of that Jewishness, as good as it was for me, kind of faded into the background when I came face to face with Jesus. He just kind of rose up out of the pages and I was drawn to him like a magnet. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Everything he said and did, and it was sometimes difficult stuff. I don't claim to understand everything I read. And he wasn't going around saying, hey man, I'm the new guru and all that stuff. He was saying difficult, very difficult things, and yet he was so full of compassion. He looked into people's hearts and all the rubbish in there, and he still loved them, and he did miracles, and he said things, and these guys were following him, and he kept saying, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to die, and they're going to raise me up, I'm going to be raised up, rather, on the third day. And he was saying all of that, and I thought, wow, he knew in advance. I never knew he knew in advance that was going to happen. I thought it was some tragic accident that was my fault, sort of thing. But sure enough, it happened. He was arrested, he was interrogated by various courts, he was beaten and spat upon and terribly abused and horribly tortured by scourging and finally nailed to this Roman cross. And even when he was lifted up in agony up on that cross, he was saying the most amazing things. And I'm reading all of this, and I'm reading how he died on the cross, how he was buried, and how he was raised on the third day. And all the time I'm using the stuff at the bottom of each page to cross-reference back and see how he's fulfilling all these prophecies, these Messianic prophecies from the Old Testament, right? I finished the Gospel of Matthew and I got into Mark. I got halfway through Mark and I thought, whoa, hold on, okay. I've got to be a bit careful here. This Bible was translated, including the Old Testament, by Christians. They might slant it to their way of thinking, so I've got to be a bit careful. I'll go and buy a Jewish Bible. So I went to a Jewish shop called the Blue and White Shop in Ilford in Essex. It was the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the law, the prophets, the writings, the books in a different order, Jewish Publication Society, the table of readings in the synagogue through the year, and it was called the Holy Scriptures. God's sense of humor, of course. I opened it up to compare it with my Revised Standard Version, Old Testament. And it was the same. More relieved than I was, I can tell you. I wanted it to be the same. I really did. I had so much invested in it, more than I knew. So I settled down and finished reading my gospel accounts. I finished the gospel according to Mark, got into the gospel of Luke. I finished the gospel of Luke, got into the gospel of John. By the time I finished that beautiful gospel according to Yochanan, I knew without any shadow of a doubt that Jesus was the fulfillment of every Messianic prophecy, and that Jesus was and is the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is, after all, our Messiah. He is. He's the one that the prophets were talking about. He is our Messiah.
Unless I see the scars of the nails in his hands, and put my finger on those scars, and my hand in his side, I will not believe.
A week later, the disciples were together again indoors, and Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but Jesus came and stood among them.
Peace be with you. Put your finger here and look at my hands. Then reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop your doubting and believe.
My Lord and my God.
Do you believe? Because you see me. How happy are those who believe without seeing me.
In his disciples' presence, Jesus performed many other miracles which are not written down in this book. But these have been written in order that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God.
Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, when he was saying that, what he meant was exactly that. There is no other way but through Jesus. Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. That's it. That's what he said. It's him. Him and him alone. He set me free. He can set you free. Tonight, let it be tonight. God wants you to know him. Come to me, he says. Surrender your life to me. Who better to trust with your life than the one who created you?
Funny, but it's true what loneliness can do. Since I've been away, I have loved you more each day, walking back to happiness. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. Say goodbye to loneliness. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. I never knew I'd miss you. Now I know what I must do. Walking back to happiness I shared with you. Making up for things I said. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. And mistakes to which they led. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. I shouldn't have gone away, so I'm coming back today. Walking back to happiness I threw away. Walking back to happiness with you. Said farewell to loneliness I knew. Laid aside foolish pride, learned the truth from tears I cried. Spread the news, I'm on my way. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. All my blues have blown away. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. I'm bringing you love so true, 'cause that's what I owe to you. Walking back to happiness I shared with you. Walking back to happiness with you. Who said farewell to loneliness I knew. Laid aside foolish pride, learned the truth from tears I cried. Spread the news, I'm on my way. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. All my blues have blown away. Whoop-ah, oh yeah. I shared with you.